Commander Vex Thor stood on the bridge of his flagship, his scaled fingers drumming against the command console. The holographic display in front of him showed something he had never seen before in his 30 years of military service. Hundreds of warning beacons, maybe even thousands, scattered across the edge of an entire sector of space like a fence made of blinking lights. His communications officer had been playing the messages for the past hour. Every single beacon said the same thing, just in different languages. Some were in tongues so ancient that the translation computer had to dig through historical archives just to make sense of them. Quarantine zone. Terran space. Do not enter. Survival, 0%. The message repeated over and over. Vex Thor had heard it in Zalkari, in the clicking language of the Hive worlds, in the musical tones of the crystalline chorus, and in at least 40 other dialects. Whoever put these beacons here had gone to incredible effort to make sure every species in the galaxy could understand the warning. Commander, the translation database has identified mentions of Earth and humans in several of the older beacon languages, his science officer reported, her voice uncertain. The warnings appear to be at least 300 standard cycles old. Some may be older. Vex Thor waved a dismissive claw. 300 cycles? These warnings are older than my grandmother's grandmother. Whatever danger existed here is long dead and forgotten. He pulled up the mineral scan data again, letting the numbers wash over him like a beautiful song. The readings from inside the quarantine zone showed deposits of rare elements that could power the Zalkari Empire for generations. Crystal formations worth more than entire planets. Energy signatures that suggested technology far beyond what most species possessed. His second-in-command, a grizzled veteran named Thrak, stepped closer. Sir, perhaps we should report this to High Command first. Let them decide if... And let them send someone else to claim the glory? Vex Thor cut him off. Let them give this prize to some politician's nephew who has never seen real combat? No. We found this. We will be the ones remembered in the history archives. Thrak's expression showed doubt, but he knew better than to argue further. The commander had made up his mind. Besides, Vex Thor continued, gesturing at the beacons, look at them. Primitive technology. Simple radio broadcasts. Whoever the Terrans were, they clearly didn't even have basic quantum communication. They probably destroyed themselves in some ancient war, and these warnings are just ghosts from a dead civilization. He turned to his tactical officer. What does our military analysis say about the zone? Sensors show no defensive installations, no active weapons platforms, no shield generators, the officer replied, reading from his screen. We detect some structures that might be space stations, but they appear to be in low-power mode. Minimal energy signatures. You see. Vex Thor spread his arms wide, addressing his entire bridge crew. There is nothing to fear here. Just old warnings protecting old treasures. Treasures that now belong to the Zalkari Empire. He pulled up the fleet roster. 12 ships under his direct command. 3 heavy cruisers, 6 destroyers, and 3 science vessels. More than enough firepower to handle any surprise that might be waiting in the dust. All ships, this is Commander Vex Thor, he announced over the fleet-wide channel. We are entering the quarantine zone. Battle stations, shields up. Weapons ready, but do not fire unless fired upon. Science teams, prepare your scanning equipment. We are about to make history. A chorus of acknowledgements came back from the other ship captains. Some sounded eager. Others sounded nervous. Vex Thor didn't care which. They would all follow orders. The 12 ships moved forward in formation, crossing the invisible line where the warning beacons marked the boundary of Terran space. Vex Thor watched the sensor displays carefully, expecting alarms, weapons lock warnings, something. Anything. Nothing happened. Space on the other side of the boundary looked exactly like space on their side. Stars twinkled in the distance. Dust clouds drifted on solar winds. A few asteroids tumbled slowly through the void. Sensor sweep, Vex Thor ordered. Give me everything within 10 light minutes. His crew worked quickly and data began flooding the displays. Charts and graphs and 3-dimensional maps appeared, showing the layout of this forbidden sector. Commander, I'm detecting what appears to be a planetary system about 7 light minutes ahead, the navigation officer called out. 5 planets, 1 in what would be a habitable zone for carbon-based life. Multiple artificial satellites in orbit around the 3rd planet. Any response to our presence? None, sir. Everything appears dormant. Vex Thor felt his confidence growing with every passing moment. This was exactly what he had expected. An abandoned sector left behind by a species that had either died out or moved on. The warnings were just automated systems, still running on ancient programming, protecting nothing. "Take us deeper," he commanded. "Toward that planetary system." The fleet moved forward, engines humming with power. Vexthor was already composing his report to high command in his mind. He would be modest, of course, but firm. He had taken a calculated risk and it had paid off. The Empire would reward such initiative. Perhaps a promotion. Perhaps command of an entire battle group. Then the sensors beeped. "Contact," the tactical officer announced. "Single vessel bearing 270, distance 3 light minutes and closing." On screen. The view screen shifted, magnifying a small section of space. There, against the black, was a ship. Vexthor leaned forward, studying it carefully. It was tiny compared to his flagship. Maybe 1/10 the size. The design was strange, smooth lines and angular surfaces that didn't match any architectural style in the Zelkeri database. The hull appeared to be made of some kind of gray metal, pitted and scarred like it had seen many battles. "Analysis," Vexthor demanded. His science officer worked her console quickly. "No energy shields detected. Weapons appear to be conventional kinetic and energy-based systems. The power signature is odd, sir. It's much lower than expected for a vessel that size, but the readings fluctuate in ways I don't recognize." "Is it a threat?" Pause. "Unknown, sir. By tonnage and visible armament, it should not be a match for even one of our destroyers. But I cannot explain the power fluctuations." Vexthor studied the human ship. It looked old. Like something pulled from a museum and sent out as a last desperate defense. He felt a mixture of pity and contempt. "Open a channel," he ordered. Static filled the bridge speakers, then cleared. A voice came through, speaking in heavily accented Galactic Common. "Unidentified vessels, this is Captain Jake Mitchell of the Terran Defense Force. You have entered restricted space. Turn around immediately and return to the boundary." The bridge crew looked at Vexthor. He smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Terran Defense Force," he said. "So the warnings were not entirely lies. There are still humans here." He stood from his command chair, drawing himself up to his full height. "This is Commander Vexthor of the Zelkeri Imperial Fleet. We claim this sector by right of superior force. Your warnings are outdated and meaningless. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded or be destroyed. Silence on the channel." Vexthor could almost imagine the human captain's face, pale with fear, realizing how outmatched he was. Then the human spoke again, and there was something in his voice that Vexthor couldn't quite identify. Not fear. Something else. "Commander, you need to listen very carefully. Those warnings exist for a reason. We don't want to hurt you. Please turn your ships around." Vexthor laughed, the sound echoing through his bridge. His crew joined in nervously. "You don't want to hurt us? Look at your ship, human. Look at mine. You are one ancient vessel. I have 12 modern warships. Your bravery is admirable but foolish." "It's not bravery," the human replied quietly. "It's a final warning. We've been trying to avoid this for 300 years. Avoid what? Avoid progress? Avoid the inevitable expansion of superior species into empty space." Vexthor's voice grew harder. "Your time is over, human. Accept it with dignity." Another pause. Then the human captain sighed, and Vexthor heard something that made his scales prickle. It sounded like sadness. Like regret. "Weapons officer," Vexthor snapped. "Target that vessel. Disable its engines. Let's show these primitives what real firepower looks like." "Yes, sir. Locking on now." The tactical display showed target locks engaging. 6 of Vexthor's ships had the human vessel in their sights. Enough firepower to crack a moon. Fire. Brilliant beams of plasma energy lanced through space, converging on where the human ship floated. And hit nothing. The human vessel simply wasn't there anymore. It had moved impossibly fast, accelerating in a direction that should have torn any living crew apart from the G-forces. "What?" Vexthor started. "Sir, target has repositioned," his tactical officer stammered. "I don't understand how. That acceleration should have been lethal to any organic crew." On the view screen, the small human ship hung in space exactly where it had been before, as if it had never moved. But the math didn't lie. Somehow it had dodged, then returned to its original position in less than a second. Fire again. All ships. The space around the human vessel lit up with weapons fire. Plasma beams, kinetic rounds, energy torpedoes, everything the Zelkeri fleet could throw. The human ship danced through the barrage like a leaf in wind, moving with precision that defied physics. Not a single shot came close. Then it stopped moving and hung there in space, waiting. Vexthor felt cold fear creeping up his spine for the first time. The human captain's voice came through again, and now Vexthor recognized the emotion he'd heard earlier. It was pity. You were warned, Captain Mitchell said softly. The human ship fired once. Just once. 7 of Vexthor's ships disappeared from the sensor display in an instant, leaving nothing behind but expanding clouds of debris. The bridge of Vexthor's flagship fell into complete silence. 7 ships. Gone. Just like that. One moment they had been there on the tactical display, their signals strong and clear. The next moment, nothing but empty space and debris. Vexthor stared at the screen, his mind refusing to accept what his eyes had just seen. Those weren't small patrol boats. 3 of them had been heavy cruisers, each one capable of reducing a city to rubble. Ships with crews of over 200 warriors each. Families, friends, people he had served with for years. All gone in a single shot. Damage report? He croaked, his throat suddenly dry. What hit us? What kind of weapon was that? His science officer was frantically working her console, her claws tapping so fast they blurred. I don't know, Commander. The sensors registered a massive energy spike from the human vessel, then the readings just stopped. Our ships didn't explode. They didn't break apart. They just ceased to exist at the molecular level. That's impossible, Thrak whispered beside him. No weapon in the known galaxy can do that. Not even the ancient weapons from the Purge Wars could completely disintegrate matter like that. On the view screen, the small human ship floated peacefully in the void, as if it hadn't just committed mass murder. It looked exactly the same as before, old, battered, unremarkable. But Vexthor saw it differently now. It wasn't a museum piece. It was a predator disguised as prey. The communication channel crackled back to life. Captain Jake Mitchell's voice came through, and Vexthor noticed something he had missed before. The human didn't sound triumphant or angry. He sounded tired. Sad even. You were warned, Mitchell said, his tone carrying the weight of centuries. The beacons weren't placed to scare you away. They were placed to save your lives. Turn your remaining ships around, Commander. Leave this space. Don't make me do that again. Vexthor felt something he hadn't experienced since he was a young recruit in his first battle. Real, genuine fear. The kind that made his scales feel cold and his hearts beat too fast. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to retreat, to preserve what was left of his fleet. But then he thought about the report he would have to file. How would he explain this to High Command? That he had fled from a single enemy vessel? That he had abandoned the richest mineral deposits ever discovered because one old ship had gotten lucky? His pride, that deep Zalkari pride that had driven his species to conquer 40 star systems, wouldn't allow it. He had spent his entire career building a reputation as a commander who never backed down, who never retreated. Officers who showed weakness didn't get promoted in the Empire. They got reassigned to frontier outposts and forgotten. Sir, his tactical officer said carefully, perhaps we should consider. Silence. Vexthor roared, slamming his fist against the console. The bridge crew flinched. One lucky shot does not win a war. Analyze their weapon. Find its weakness. Every weapon has a recharge time, a power limitation, something we can exploit. His science officer looked uncertain but obeyed. Scanning now, Commander. The energy signature was unusual. I'm seeing residual particles that don't match any known weapon system. If I had to guess, it's some kind of directed antimatter beam, but the focusing mechanism would require technology far beyond. I don't care about the theory, Vexthor interrupted. Tell me how long until they can fire again. Unknown, sir. Without knowing the power source, I cannot calculate recharge rates. Vexthor began pacing the bridge, his mind racing. 5 ships left under his command. 5 ships against 1 human vessel. The math should still favor him overwhelmingly. No single ship, no matter how powerful its weapon, could stand against coordinated attacks from multiple angles. Spread out the fleet, he ordered. Maximum dispersal pattern. If that weapon can only fire in one direction at a time, we'll surround them. They can't target all of us at once. Commander, I strongly advise against, Thrak began. Your advice is noted and ignored, Vexthor snapped. Tactical, execute dispersal pattern Delta. All ships prepare for synchronized attack on my mark. The remaining 5 Zalkari vessels began moving, spreading out in 3 dimensions to create a sphere around the human ship. Vexthor watched the maneuver with satisfaction. This was basic military strategy. No matter how powerful the human weapon was, simple geometry was on his side now. "Sir, incoming transmission from Captain Mitchell," the communications officer reported. "Put it through." The human captain's face appeared on a smaller screen beside the main view screen. Vexthor saw him clearly for the first time. Mitchell looked old for a military officer, maybe 50 or 60 by human standards if Vexthor remembered the species profile correctly. His hair was gray at the temples and deep lines creased his face. But his eyes were what caught Vexthor's attention. They were blue like ice, and they held an expression of profound sorrow. "Commander Vexthor," Mitchell said slowly, "I'm going to ask you one more time. Please leave. You don't understand what you're doing. You don't understand what we are." "I understand perfectly," Vexthor replied, forcing confidence into his voice. "You have one powerful weapon. But you're alone. My ships now surround you from every direction. Even if you destroy one or two more, the others will tear your ship apart. Surrender now, and I promise your crew will be treated with honor." Mitchell closed his eyes for a moment as if in pain. When he opened them again, Vexthor saw something shift in that expression. The sadness was still there, but now it was mixed with something else. Resignation maybe. Or acceptance. "We tried," Mitchell said quietly, almost to himself. "We put up the warnings. We isolated ourselves. We did everything we could to avoid this." He looked directly at Vexthor through the screen. "What happens next is on you, Commander. Remember that." The transmission ended. "All ships report ready, sir," the tactical officer announced. "Target locked from 5 different vectors. On your command." Vexthor raised his claw, ready to give the order. This would be recorded in the history archives. The moment Commander Vexthor defeated the mysterious human defenders and claimed the Terran sector for the Empire, his name would be spoken with respect for generations. "Fire," he commanded. 20 different weapon systems fired simultaneously. Plasma beams from 3 directions, kinetic missiles from another 2, energy torpedoes spiraling in complex patterns designed to be impossible to dodge. The space around the human ship became a brilliant display of destructive light. For a moment, Vexthor thought they had him. There was no way anything could survive that concentrated firepower. No amount of speed or maneuverability could dodge attacks coming from every direction at once. Then his tactical officer screamed, "Sir, the human ship is gone. I've lost sensor contact." "What do you mean gone?" Vexthor demanded, his eyes locked on the view screen. The space where Mitchell's ship had been was now just empty void filled with dissipating weapon energy. "It's not there anymore, sir. Wait. New contact. Bearing 090, distance 2,000 kilometers. How did it?" The human ship reappeared on their sensors, now positioned perfectly between 2 of Vexthor's remaining vessels. It had moved so fast that the sensors had lost track entirely. One moment in the center of their formation, the next moment 2,000 kilometers away. And it was already firing. This time Vexthor saw it happen in slow motion, as if his mind was trying to process every detail. A beam of pure white light shot from the human vessel, touching one of his destroyers. The ship didn't explode. It didn't burn. It simply unmade itself, the molecular bonds holding its structure together breaking down all at once. Metal, plastic, flesh, bone, everything reduced to atoms that scattered into space like dust in wind. 237 crew members. Gone. Before Vexthor could even process that loss, the human ship moved again. This time his sensors caught it, an acceleration of over 500 Gs. No organic crew should be able to survive that. The forces involved would turn any living being into paste. But the human ship didn't seem to care about physics or biology. It danced through space like a ghost, repositioning faster than his weapons could track. Another white beam. Another destroyer ceased to exist. Evasive maneuvers. Vexthor screamed. "All ships, random pattern. Don't let it lock on." His remaining 3 ships scattered, their pilots pushing engines to maximum. They jinked and weaved, trying to be unpredictable. It didn't matter. The human vessel moved with purpose, with intent, like a hunter who knew exactly where its prey would go before they got there. It anticipated every dodge, every attempt to escape. A 3rd beam lanced out. His last heavy cruiser vanished from existence. Now only 2 ships remained. His flagship and 1 destroyer. "Jump to hyperspace," Thrak shouted. "We need to retreat now." "Hyperspace engines need 30 seconds to charge," the navigation officer reported, her voice shaking. "We're too close to the gravity well of that planetary system. Physics won't allow." She never finished the sentence. The human ship appeared directly in front of them, so close that Vexthor could see individual panels on its hull. It rotated smoothly, bringing its main weapon to bear on the destroyer. "No," Vexthor whispered. The white beam fired. His last escort ship disappeared. Now he was alone. One flagship against one human vessel. Except it wasn't really a fight anymore. It had never been a fight. It had been an execution, clinical and precise. The human ship just floated there in front of them, not firing, not moving. Waiting. Captain Mitchell's voice came through the speakers again. "Your weapons are offline. My targeting systems have disabled them remotely. Your hyperspace engine is locked out. You can't run and you can't fight. But I'm not going to kill you, Commander Vexthor." Vexthor slumped in his command chair, all the fight draining out of him. Around the bridge, his crew sat in shocked silence. Some were crying. Others just stared at nothing, broken. "Why?" Vexthor managed to ask. "Why spare me?" "Because someone needs to deliver a message," Mitchell replied. His face appeared on screen again, and now Vexthor could see the exhaustion there. This human captain looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Someone needs to tell the galaxy what happened here." "What are you?" Vexthor asked, his voice barely a whisper. Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. "We're what happens when a species gets too good at war. We're what happens when evolution and technology combine in the worst possible way. We're the reason those warning beacons exist." He leaned forward slightly. "I'm sending coordinates to your navigation system. They'll take you to the edge of Terran space. You have 1 hour to leave. If you're still here after that, I won't be so merciful." 1 hour. Vexthor felt a spark of his old pride returning. "And then what? You'll call for backup? Show me these legendary human fleets." Mitchell's expression didn't change. "No, Commander. I won't call anyone. I won't need to. Do you know how many ships are in the Terran Defense Force?" Vexthor didn't answer. "One," Mitchell said softly. "Just mine. 1 ship, 1 crew. That's all Earth needs to defend itself." The implication hit Vexthor like a physical blow. 1 ship. 1 crew had just destroyed 11 modern warships without taking a single hit. What could an entire fleet of such vessels do? What could a whole species of humans do if they decided to leave their quarantine zone? "But that's not why you should leave," Mitchell continued. "You should leave because right now Earth Command is watching this encounter. They're watching to see if you'll be smart enough to run, or stupid enough to call for more ships. If you call for reinforcements, Commander, then humanity will interpret that as an invasion. An act of war." Mitchell's ice-blue eyes seemed to look straight into Vexthor's soul. "And if Earth goes to war, Commander, we don't stop until the threat is completely eliminated. We can't stop. It's in our genetics now, hardwired into our brains. Once we start fighting, we become something else. Something that scared us so badly we locked ourselves away from the rest of the galaxy." He paused. "So I'm going to ask you one final time, and I want you to think very carefully about your answer. Are you going to leave quietly, or are you going to make this worse?" Vexthor looked around his bridge at the faces of his surviving crew. Young officers who had families waiting for them. Veterans who had served with honor for decades. All of them looking to him for leadership, for guidance. For the first time in his career, Vexthor made the smart choice instead of the proud one. "Set course for the coordinates Captain Mitchell provided," he said quietly. "Maximum speed. We're leaving." The relief on his crew's faces was visible. His navigator quickly punched in the course. As his flagship turned away from Earth and began accelerating toward the boundary, Vexthor watched the human ship on his rear sensors. It didn't follow. It didn't gloat. It simply turned and headed back toward that distant planet, its work done. But Vexthor knew this wasn't over. Pride was a powerful thing in the Zalkari Empire. And the Empire didn't take defeat well. He pulled up his communication console and began composing a message to High Command. Not a request for rescue. Something else entirely. A request for a full battle group. 200 ships. Enough firepower to sterilize a planet. He told himself it was for the glory of the Empire. But deep down, in a place he didn't want to examine too closely, Vexthor knew the truth. It was revenge. It took 3 weeks for the Zalkari battle group to arrive. 3 weeks of Vexthor sitting in strategy meetings, defending his decisions, explaining over and over what had happened in Terran space. The military tribunal had been brutal. 5 admirals sitting in judgment, their faces carved from stone as they reviewed the tactical recordings. "You lost 11 ships to a single enemy vessel," Admiral Corvin had said, his voice dripping with contempt. "And instead of accepting this humiliation quietly, you want us to send 200 more ships into the same trap?" But Vexthor had been prepared. He had studied the recordings frame by frame, analyzing every moment of the encounter. He had data, theories, explanations for why things had gone wrong. The human vessel caught us by surprise, he had argued. We didn't understand their technology. We do now. Our scientists have analyzed the weapon signatures. We know what we're facing. 200 ships, properly coordinated, with full knowledge of the enemy's capabilities, we can overwhelm them through sheer numbers alone. The admirals had debated for hours. Some wanted to forget about Terran space entirely, to mark it as forbidden and move on. But others saw what Vexthor saw, the mineral wealth, the strategic position, the glory of conquest. And more than that, they saw the insult. One human ship had made the Zalkari Empire look weak. That could not stand. In the end, they had approved his request. 200 warships. The largest battle group assembled in a generation. Enough firepower to reduce entire worlds to slag. Now those ships hung in space just outside the Terran boundary, and Vexthor felt vindicated. From the observation deck of his new flagship, a massive dreadnought 3 times the size of his previous command, he could see the fleet stretching out in formation. Heavy cruisers, destroyers, carriers, support vessels, all bristling with weapons. The combined firepower represented here could sweep aside any military force in known space. All ships report ready, Commander, his new tactical officer reported. This crew was different from his last one. These were veterans pulled from elite units across the Empire. The best of the best. Vexthor nodded slowly, savoring the moment. Open a channel to the fleet. I want everyone to hear this. The communications officer gestured that the channel was live. Warriors of the Empire, Vexthor began, his voice strong and clear. Today we reclaim our honor. Today we show the humans that the Zalkari cannot be challenged without consequence. They destroyed 11 of our ships. We will answer with 200. They think their warnings will protect them. We will show them that nothing can stand against our united strength. For the Empire. A roar of approval echoed back from 200 ships. Thousands of voices united in battle cry. All ships, advance, Vexthor commanded. The fleet moved forward as one, crossing the boundary marked by those ancient warning beacons. Vexthor half expected the human ship to appear again, to challenge them with more threats. But the sensors showed nothing. Empty space stretched before them. Sensor sweep, he ordered. Find me those human defense stations. Find me their ships. Find me Captain Jake Mitchell. The science teams went to work, scanning with every instrument available. Minutes passed. Then an officer called out. Commander, I'm detecting multiple orbital structures around the 3rd planet. Previous scans showed them in low-power mode, but they're activating now. Energy signatures increasing rapidly. How many structures? Counting now, sir. Initial count shows, at least 50 stations in various orbits. Wait, that number is increasing. 70. 90. Sir, these stations are small. Most are no bigger than a shuttle, but there are hundreds of them scattered throughout the system. Vexthor felt a moment of unease but pushed it aside. What about ships? Where is Mitchell's vessel? Not detecting any ship-sized contacts, sir. Just the orbital stations and... Wait. New contacts emerging. Multiple small craft launching from the stations. On the tactical display, red dots began appearing. First dozens, then hundreds, then thousands. They poured out from the human stations like water from a broken dam, each one accelerating toward the Zalkari fleet. Fighters? Thrak asked, leaning forward to study the display. He had insisted on coming along for this mission, despite his reservations. The humans are sending fighters against a battle group? Drones, sir, the science officer corrected, her voice uncertain. No life signs. They're automated craft. Each one is approximately 4 meters long, minimal mass, but showing significant power signatures for their size. Vexthor watched the swarm approach. There were so many of them that the tactical display had trouble rendering individual units. The computer switched to showing them as a cloud, a moving mass of red that flowed through space like liquid. How many? He asked. The tactical officer worked his console frantically. Computer estimates between 8 and 10,000 individual units, Commander. Still launching. The number keeps growing. 10,000 against 200. The math seemed absurd. Even if each drone was armed, they were tiny. His ships had shields, armor, point defense systems designed to handle exactly this kind of swarm attack. All ships activate point defense networks, Vexthor ordered calmly. Prepare anti-fighter weapons. This is what they designed for. Let the drones come. The Zalkari fleet shifted formation, each ship's automated defense systems coming online. Thousands of small turrets rotated, tracking systems locked on to the approaching swarm. These weapons could fire hundreds of rounds per second, creating an impenetrable wall of projectiles that should shred any small craft foolish enough to approach. The drones swarmed close to weapons range. Vexthor expected them to spread out, to try to flank or use some clever maneuver. Instead, they accelerated directly toward the fleet's center, like a spear aimed at the heart. All ships, open fire, Vexthor commanded. The space between the two forces lit up with weapons fire. Every ship in the Zalkari fleet unleashed its point defense systems at once. Millions of rounds per minute filled the void, creating a wall of death that nothing should survive. The drones hit that wall and simply flowed through it. Vexthor watched in disbelief as the small craft dodged and weaved through the defensive fire with impossible precision. They moved in 3 dimensions simultaneously, their paths seemingly random but perfectly coordinated to avoid the incoming rounds. It was like watching water flow around rocks in a stream. Every drone knew exactly where every other drone was, adjusting its trajectory in real time to avoid collisions while simultaneously dodging weapons fire. Impossible, his tactical officer breathed. The processing power required to coordinate that many units, to calculate those flight paths in real time, it's beyond anything we've seen. The first drones reached the Zalkari formation. Vexthor expected explosions, kamikaze attacks. Instead, the drones simply attached themselves to the hulls of his ships like metallic parasites. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of them clustering on every vessel in the fleet. What are they doing? Vexthor demanded. Damage reports. No damage yet, sir, his engineering officer reported, confusion in his voice. They're just sitting there, attached to our hulls. Not attacking, not. The drones fired. But they didn't fire at the ships they were attached to. They fired at each other, creating a web of energy beams that crisscrossed between vessels. Vexthor realized with growing horror what he was seeing. The drones weren't weapons themselves. They were nodes in a network, turning his entire fleet into one massive target. Shields up. Maximum power, he shouted. Too late. The energy beams intensified, feeding power to each other in a cascading loop. The drones attached to his ships began to glow white-hot. Then they started cutting through the hulls, using the concentrated energy to slice through armor like it was paper. The first ship to die was a destroyer on the fleet's outer edge. The drones covering its hull suddenly pulsed with energy, and the ship broke apart from the inside out. Not an explosion, a systematic dismantling, as if invisible hands were taking it apart piece by piece. All ships, emergency burn. Break formation. Get away from each other. Vexthor ordered. The fleet tried to scatter, but the drones followed every movement. More of them kept launching from the human stations, replacing any that were destroyed by point defense fire. For every drone the Zalkari shot down, 3 more took its place. And they were learning. Vexthor could see it in the tactical data. The drones adapted to every defensive measure his fleet employed. When his ships tried concentrated fire on specific groups, the drones shifted their formations to minimize losses. When vessels attempted to ram through the swarm, the drones moved with such precision that they suffered almost no casualties while tearing chunks from the passing ships. A heavy cruiser tried to jump to hyperspace, its crew panicking. The drones covering its hull fired in unison, and the ship's hyperspace engine detonated. The resulting explosion took out 2 nearby destroyers that had been trying to provide covering fire. Sir, we've lost 40 ships in the last 10 minutes, Thrak reported, his voice tight with controlled panic. The drones are prioritizing our larger vessels. They're methodically working through the cruisers and... An alarm shrieked across the bridge. Vexthor's flagship shuddered as something impacted the hull. Drones have breached our point defense perimeter, the tactical officer shouted. They're attaching to sections 12 through 18. Engineering reports hull stress in multiple sectors. Through the view screen, Vexthor could see the battle unfolding in all its horror. His magnificent fleet, the pride of the Zalkari Empire, was being torn apart by machines. There was no honor in this. No glory. Just systematic, efficient destruction. Another cruiser broke apart, its spine severed by concentrated drone fire. A carrier tried to launch its own fighters, but the drones swarmed the launch bays, destroying the small craft before they could even leave their hangars. Command, this is Battle Group 7. A panicked voice came through the fleet channel. We're surrounded. They're cutting through our... The transmission ended in static. Vexthor pulled up the tactical display trying to find some weakness, some pattern he could exploit. But there was nothing. The drones fought with a unified intelligence that made his coordinated fleet look clumsy by comparison. They didn't hesitate. They didn't fear. They just executed their programming with perfect, terrifying efficiency. How many have we destroyed? He asked quietly. Estimated 2,000 drones eliminated, sir, the tactical officer reported. But they're still launching. Current count shows over 15,000 active units. 2,000 destroyed. And it meant nothing. The humans had sent these drones knowing full well that many would be lost. They had planned for it, accounted for it, built their entire strategy around acceptable losses. Because to them these weren't soldiers. They were tools. Expendable. Replaceable. We need to retreat, Thrak said, gripping Vexthor's shoulder. Now, before we lose everything. Retreat. Vexthor turned on him, fury and desperation mixing in his voice. Retreat where? Look at the tactical display. They're everywhere. They've surrounded the entire fleet. It was true. The drones had formed a sphere around the Zalkari battle group, cutting off every escape route. Ships that tried to break through the perimeter were swarmed instantly, covered in so many drones that their hulls disappeared under the metallic mass. Then we fight our way out, Thrak insisted. All ships concentrated push toward the boundary. If we focus our firepower. All ships execute emergency, Vexthor began. The lights on his bridge flickered. Then went out. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing everything in red. Engineering reports main power fluctuating, someone called out in the darkness. The drones have breached the reactor shielding. They're draining our power systems directly. Vexthor felt the deck shift beneath his feet. His flagship, the mightiest vessel in the fleet, was dying. And there was nothing he could do to stop it. On the view screen, now running on backup power, he watched another dozen ships die. A cruiser simply went dark, all power cut, and began tumbling through space as the drones systematically disabled every system. A destroyer tried one last desperate maneuver, pointing its main guns at its own hull to destroy the drones attached to it. The weapon's fire punched holes through the armor, and the ship explosively decompressed, killing its own crew. 3 hours. That's how long the battle lasted. 3 hours of systematic, methodical destruction. When it ended, 199 Zalkari warships floated dead in space. Some were completely destroyed, reduced to debris fields. Others were merely disabled, their crews huddled in sealed sections, waiting for rescue that might never come. Only Vexthor's flagship remained partially operational, though barely. The drones had disabled its weapons, engines and most of its systems. But they had left life support functional. The lights stayed on. The air kept circulating. Vexthor sat in his command chair, numb. Around him, his bridge crew worked in silence, trying to restore basic functions. But everyone knew the truth. They were alive only because the humans wanted them alive. The drones had pulled back, forming a perimeter around the disabled flagship. Thousands of them hung in space like a metal curtain, waiting, watching. Sir, his communications officer said softly. Incoming transmission. It's human. Put it through. A new face appeared on the view screen. Not Captain Mitchell this time. This was a woman, maybe in her 40s, with short brown hair and tired eyes. She wore a simple gray uniform with minimal insignia. Commander Vexthor, she said, her voice carrying a weight that reminded him of Mitchell's tone. I'm Director Carol Hayes of Earth Defense Command. Are you receiving this transmission? I'm here, Vexthor managed to say. Good. We've stabilized your ship's critical systems. Your crew is safe for now. We're sending a recovery team to bring you to one of our stations. You'll be treated well. Medical care for the injured, food and water for everyone. We're not monsters, Commander. Vexthor almost laughed at that. Not monsters? They had just destroyed an entire battle group with machines. But he bit back the response. What about my crew on the other ships? He asked. We're already recovering survivors, Hayes replied. The Zalkari who are still alive will be returned to you. Unfortunately, many didn't make it. The drones tried to minimize casualties, but in battle, that's not always possible. Minimize casualties. As if this had been some kind of careful surgical operation rather than wholesale slaughter. Why? Vexthor asked, his voice breaking. Why spare me again? Why not just finish it? Hayes leaned forward slightly. Because you need to understand something, Commander. You need to see what we've become. Then you need to go back to your empire and make sure they understand too. Understand what? That the warnings are real, Hayes said simply. That we didn't quarantine ourselves because we're afraid of you. We did it because we're afraid of us. What you saw today was just our automated defenses. Not our fleet. Not our soldiers. Just machines following programming. She paused, letting that sink in. If you had actually threatened Earth itself, Commander, if you had gotten past the drones and made it to our planet, you would have seen what real humans can do when we fight. And I promise you, that's something you never want to see. The transmission ended. Vex Thor sat in silence, staring at the empty screen. Through the viewports, he could see a human ship approaching. It was larger than Mitchell's vessel but still small by Zalkari standards. Rescue craft probably. Coming to collect the survivors of his pride, his ambition, his catastrophic failure. 200 ships. The finest warriors in the Zalkari Empire. Defeated by machines in 3 hours. And according to Director Hayes, that wasn't even the humans fighting seriously. What had they awakened? The human station was nothing like Vex Thor expected. He had imagined a military fortress all steel and weapons, built to intimidate enemies. Instead, the recovery ship had brought him to a place that looked almost peaceful. The walls were painted in soft colors, blues and greens that reminded him of natural landscapes. Plants grew in alcoves along the corridors, real living plants with leaves and flowers. Soft lighting made everything feel calm, quiet. It was deeply unsettling. A human medical team had checked him over when he first arrived, scanning him with devices he didn't recognize, making sure he wasn't injured. They had been polite, professional, and completely unfazed by his alien appearance. Like they treated wounded enemy commanders every day. Now he sat in a small room that the humans called a conference chamber. A table, some chairs, a window looking out into space where he could see his destroyed fleet floating like funeral markers. The door opened and a woman walked in. She was tall for a human, maybe in her mid-50s, with gray hair pulled back in a simple style. She wore civilian clothes, a dark jacket and simple pants, not a military uniform. Her face showed the lines of someone who had seen a lot in her life, who had made hard decisions and lived with the consequences. "Commander Vex Thor," she said, extending her hand in that strange human greeting gesture. "I'm Ambassador Lisa Grant. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Vex Thor stared at the offered hand but didn't take it. "Did I have a choice?" Grant lowered her hand without any sign of offense. "Actually, yes. You could have refused. We would have respected that decision. But I'm glad you didn't." She sat down across from him, her movements casual, non-threatening. "Can I get you anything? Water? Food? I'm told our medical team cleared you to consume standard protein supplements if you're hungry." "I don't want your hospitality," Vex Thor said coldly. "I want to know why I'm here. Why you didn't just kill me with the rest of my fleet." "Most of your fleet survived, actually," Grant replied calmly. "We've recovered over 60,000 Zalkari from disabled ships. They're being held in comfortable quarters on various stations throughout the system. Medical care is being provided to the injured. We'll return all of them to your empire once we've had this conversation." 60,000 survivors. Out of crews totaling nearly 80,000 across the battle group. The humans had shown more mercy than Vex Thor would have in their position. That somehow made it worse. "This conversation," he repeated. "About what?" "About how superior your technology is. About how foolish we were to challenge you. I already know these things, Ambassador. I've learned them twice now at the cost of hundreds of lives." Grant shook her head slowly. "No, Commander. You haven't learned anything yet. You've seen our defenses. You've seen what our automated systems can do. But you don't understand why those systems exist. You don't understand what we're actually afraid of." She stood up and walked to the window looking out at the wreckage. 320 years ago, Earth was on the verge of collapse. Our population had reached 12 billion. We had spread to Mars, to the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, to orbital stations around every major body in our solar system. We thought we had conquered space. Vex Thor said nothing, just watched her. "Then we went to war with ourselves," Grant continued, her voice distant, like she was remembering something painful even though it had happened centuries before she was born. "The reasons don't matter anymore. Resources, ideology, old hatreds, the usual human stupidity. What matters is what we did about it." She turned to face him. "We had already developed basic neural implants by then. Medical devices mostly. Ways to help people with disabilities control prosthetic limbs, to restore sight to the blind. But someone, and history has lost track of exactly who, someone realized those same implants could be weaponized." "Weaponized how?" Vex Thor asked despite himself. "Imagine you're a soldier in combat," Grant said. "Normally your brain has to process everything individually. See the enemy, decide to aim, pull the trigger, deal with the recoil, acquire the next target. Each step takes time, requires conscious thought. But with a neurocombat implant, all of that becomes automatic. Your brain identifies a threat and your body responds before you even consciously register what's happening. Reaction times measured in milliseconds instead of seconds. She walked back to the table, her fingers drumming on its surface. But that was just the beginning. Once we had soldiers with enhanced reflexes, someone developed tactical coordination implants. Soldiers could share sensory data, see through each other's eyes, coordinate their movements without speaking. A squad of 10 humans could fight like a single organism with 10 bodies. Vexthor thought about the drones, how they had moved with perfect coordination. Your machines learned from us, Grant finished. Yes. The drones you fought are based on our own combat doctrine, Commander. They move the way human soldiers move when they're linked together through neural networks. But here's the thing, the drones are actually slower and less efficient than actual human troops would be. We built them that way deliberately. As a first line of defense that might scare enemies away without revealing our true capabilities. She sat back down, and Vexthor saw something in her eyes that made his blood run cold. It wasn't pride or boasting. It was genuine fear. The neural implants kept evolving, Grant continued. We developed AI assistants that lived in our heads, helping us process information faster, make better decisions. We created genetic modifications that enhanced our reflexes, our endurance, our ability to survive in hostile environments. And then someone created the network. The network. A collective battle consciousness, Grant said softly. Imagine every soldier on a battlefield connected to every other soldier. Not just sharing information but sharing thoughts, tactics, instincts. 1 million individual humans fighting as a single distributed mind. When the network activated, we stopped being individuals. We became something else. Something that existed only to fight, to win, to eliminate threats. She stood again, pacing now, and Vexthor realized she was agitated in a way she hadn't been before. This part of the story clearly bothered her deeply. The war that almost destroyed us lasted 6 months, she said. 6 months of the most efficient, brutal combat in human history. Both sides used the network. Both sides had enhanced soldiers. The casualties were unimaginable. 4 billion people died, Commander. 1/3 of our entire species. Not over years or decades like normal wars. In 6 months. Vexthor felt his throat go dry. 4 billion. The entire Zalkari Empire had a population of roughly 3 billion spread across 40 worlds. We killed ourselves with such efficiency that it terrified the survivors, Grant continued. When the war finally ended, not because anyone won but because both sides simultaneously realized we were committing species suicide, the remaining human leaders made a decision. We couldn't get rid of the technology. It was part of us now, written into our genes, hardwired into our brains. But we could isolate ourselves. She turned to face him fully. We abandoned all our colonies outside the Sol system. Pulled everyone back to Earth and a few orbital stations. Put up the warning beacons in every language we could translate. And we made a pact with ourselves, we would never leave this system. We would never spread our war capabilities to the rest of the galaxy. As long as we stayed here, as long as nobody threatened us, the network would stay dormant. Dormant? Vexthor repeated. Not destroyed. Can't be destroyed, Grant said flatly. It's not a machine you can switch off, Commander. It's in our heads. Every human born in the last 3 centuries has the genetic modifications. Every human over the age of 16 has neural implants. We're all potential soldiers, all potentially part of the network. We just choose not to activate it. She walked over to a control panel on the wall and pressed something. A holographic display appeared, showing what looked like a human brain, lit up with glowing pathways. This is my brain, Grant said. Right now, I'm just an ambassador. A diplomat. I haven't seen combat in 30 years. But if Earth Defense Command decided we were under serious threat, if they activated the network, I would stop being an ambassador. My neural implants would connect me to every other human in the system. My genetic modifications would kick in, flooding my body with combat-optimized hormones. And I would become a soldier again, whether I wanted to or not. She closed the display. That's what we're afraid of, Commander. Not you. Not the Zalkari Empire. Not any external threat. We're afraid of ourselves. We're afraid of what we become when we fight. Vexthor sat in silence, processing this. Finally he asked, the drones? Captain Mitchell's ship. Those were safeguards, Grant answered. Automated defenses designed to stop invasions without requiring us to activate the network. Mitchell and crews like his are volunteers who stay on permanent duty at the edge of the system, using ships equipped with weapons that don't require network activation. They're our first line of defense. Our way of stopping threats before they become serious enough that Earth decides to wake up the sleeping monster. And if they fail? Vexthor asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know the answer. Grant's expression became very serious. Then every human in this system becomes a soldier. Our entire civilization, scientists, teachers, engineers, artists, children as young as 16, everyone stops what they're doing and reports for combat duty. Within hours we would have a military force of 8 billion networked soldiers, all sharing the same tactical awareness, all moving with perfect coordination. She leaned on the table, her eyes locked on his. Do you understand what that means, Commander? 8 billion humans all linked together, all fighting as a single entity. We wouldn't have a command structure because we wouldn't need one. Every soldier would know what every other soldier was thinking, planning, doing. We wouldn't have supply lines because everyone would know where resources were needed before anyone ran out. We wouldn't have communication delays because we would all be sharing the same thoughts. Vexthor imagined it, an army larger than the entire population of the Zalkari Empire, all moving with the same coordination he'd seen in those drones, but faster, smarter, more adaptable because they were living beings capable of creativity and innovation. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever heard. And you've kept this contained for 300 years? He asked. You've never been tempted to use this power to expand, to conquer? Tempted? Grant laughed, but there was no humor in it. Every day, Commander. Do you know how many resources are out there in the galaxy? How many worlds could support human colonies? We see the same things you see when we look at the stars. But we also remember what happened when we let ourselves become weapons. We remember the 4 billion dead. We remember what it felt like to be part of the network, to lose yourself in that collective consciousness. She sat back down and now she just looked tired. The people who survived the war, the ones who made the decision to quarantine Earth, they left records. Video diaries, written accounts. I've read them. Do you know what they said about being networked? They said it felt good. Natural. Like they were finally complete. Like being an individual was the aberration, and being part of the whole was how humans were meant to exist. Grant shook her head. That's what terrifies us, Commander. Not that the network turns us into monsters. That it feels right when it happens. That part of us wants it. So we locked ourselves away, put up the warnings, and we wait. We live our lives as individuals, as artists and scientists and philosophers. And we pray that nobody is stupid enough to make us remember what we're capable of. Vexthor thought about his fleet, his pride, his certainty that superior numbers would overwhelm any defense. You're saying if we had gotten past the drones? If you had gotten past the drones and Captain Mitchell's ship, if you had actually threatened Earth itself, then yes. Earth Defense Command would have activated the network. Every human in the system would have become a soldier. And you would have faced something that no military force in the galaxy could stand against. She paused. But that's not the worst part. There's worse. Grant nodded slowly. Once the network activates, once we become that collective fighting force, we don't stop until the threat is completely eliminated. Not just defeated. Eliminated. The last time it activated, we didn't stop fighting until the enemy's entire civilization was dismantled, their technology destroyed, their ability to ever threaten us again removed permanently. That was when we were fighting ourselves, Commander. Imagine what we would do to an alien species that attacked our home. She stood up one more time, walking to the door. That's why we're sending you back to your empire. That's why we're showing you all of this. We need you to understand that the warnings aren't primitive superstition. They're not idle threats. They're desperate pleas from a species that knows what it's capable of and never wants to do it again. Grant opened the door, then looked back at him. We don't want to fight you, Commander Vexthor. We don't want to fight anyone. We just want to be left alone with our fear and our shame and our hope that maybe, someday we'll evolve past what we made ourselves into. Is that too much to ask? Vexthor had no answer. He sat in the quiet room long after the ambassador left, staring out at the graveyard of his ambitions, and wondered how he was going to explain any of this to the Empire. How do you tell your people that you found a species that could destroy them utterly, but chooses not to out of mercy? How do you explain that the real horror isn't their weapons or their technology, but their restraint? The human shuttle that brought Vexthor back to the edge of Terran space was piloted by a young woman named Rachel Torres. She couldn't have been more than 25 in human years, with dark hair tied back in a practical ponytail and a friendly smile that seemed completely out of place given the circumstances. She hummed while she flew, some human melody that Vexthor didn't recognize. First time leaving the system? Vexthor asked, more to break the uncomfortable silence than out of genuine curiosity. Oh no, Rachel replied cheerfully. I take supply runs out to the boundary markers all the time. I just never go past them. None of us do unless it's for something like this. Doesn't it bother you? Vexthor pressed. Being trapped in one solar system your whole life? Knowing there's an entire galaxy out there you'll never see? Rachel was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. My grandfather used to tell me stories about the war. He was networked during the final battles. He said when it was over, when they deactivated and became individuals again, some people couldn't handle it. They felt incomplete, broken. A lot of them took their own lives rather than live as separate beings. She adjusted their course slightly, her hands steady on the controls. So no, Commander. It doesn't bother me. I've got everything I need in Sol System. Family, friends, work I enjoy. The galaxy can have its freedom. I'll take my cage knowing what's outside the bars. Vexthor had no response to that. He turned his attention to the cargo bay behind them, where a large cylindrical object sat secured with mag clamps. The new warning beacon, custom-built for the Zalkari. Ambassador Grant had presented it to him personally before he left the station. This beacon contains detailed information about what happened here, she had explained. Tactical recordings of both encounters. Medical data about your casualties. And a full explanation of what we are and why we quarantined ourselves. Your military leaders will try to suppress this information, Commander. They'll want to save face to hide the extent of their defeat. Don't let them. Vexthor had taken the beacon without comment. What else could he do? Now, as Rachel's shuttle approached the boundary, Vexthor could see his rescue ship waiting. A Zalkari cruiser, sent by High Command to retrieve their defeated commander. The sight of it made his heart sink. Soon he would have to face them. Soon he would have to explain. We're here, Rachel announced, bringing the shuttle to a smooth stop. Your people are broadcasting standard hailing frequencies. Want me to respond? No, Vexthor said. I'll handle it from here. Rachel helped him secure the beacon to a small transport sled that he could maneuver himself. As he prepared to leave, she touched his arm gently. Commander? For what it's worth, I'm sorry about your people. The ones who died. We really did try to minimize casualties. I know, Vexthor said quietly. That somehow makes it worse. He transferred to the Zalkari cruiser, pulling the beacon behind him. The airlock cycled, and he stepped into a corridor filled with his own kind. The medical team swarmed him immediately, scanning him for injuries, asking rapid-fire questions about his health. Behind them stood Admiral Corvin, the same admiral who had reluctantly approved the battle group deployment. Commander Vexthor, Corvin said formally. Welcome back. The Empire is relieved to see you alive. Are they? Vexthor asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. Are they relieved? Or are they embarrassed that I survived to tell the story? Corvin's expression tightened. Your quarters have been prepared. You'll need to file a full report, of course. The Council will want to review. I brought the report with me, Vexthor interrupted, gesturing to the beacon. Everything that happened. Every detail. The humans made sure it was all documented. I see. Corvin studied the beacon like it was a live explosive. Well, that will certainly make the debriefing process more efficient. In the meantime, you should rest. You've been through an ordeal. The next 3 days were a blur of meetings, interrogations disguised as debriefings, and medical examinations. Vexthor told his story over and over to different groups of officers and officials. Some believed him. Many didn't. A few accused him of cowardice, of making up elaborate excuses for his failure. The recordings from the beacon settled those arguments quickly. Watching the footage of the drone attack in a conference room full of military brass was a surreal experience. Vexthor saw his own tactical decisions played back in cold detail, saw the exact moments where everything went wrong. The admirals and generals watching with him grew quieter and quieter as the recording progressed. When it finished, the room remained silent for a long time. Finally, Admiral Corvin spoke. The Council is convening an emergency session. They'll want to decide how to proceed. How to proceed? Vexthor stood up, slamming his claws on the table. There is no proceeding. Did you not watch the same footage I did? Did you not hear Ambassador Grant's explanation? The humans are giving us a gift, our lives, and a warning. We need to accept both with gratitude and stay the hell away from their space. You're suggesting we allow this insult to stand? Another admiral challenged. That we permit a single species to dictate terms to the Empire? I'm suggesting we survive, Vexthor shot back. I'm suggesting we don't commit species suicide out of wounded pride. The humans don't want our territory. They don't want our resources. They want nothing from us except to be left alone. Why can't we give them that? The debate raged for hours, then days. The military leadership was divided. Some saw reason and wanted to enforce the quarantine from the Zalkari side, to make sure no one else was foolish enough to test human defenses. Others wanted revenge, wanted to study the recordings and find weaknesses, wanted to prepare for a war they were convinced they could eventually win. Then the report reached the civilian government and everything changed. The Zalkari High Council wasn't composed of warriors and military strategists. It was made up of merchants, scientists, philosophers, and elected representatives from across the empire. They looked at the situation with different eyes. 4 billion casualties in 6 months, Counselor Thera read from the human records. That's a casualty rate that exceeds anything in known history. And they did that to themselves, fighting with restraint and rules of engagement. What would they do to us if we forced them to treat us as true enemies? Another counselor brought up economic projections. The cost of our 2 failed incursions is already devastating. 212 ships lost. Over 20,000 personnel dead. The resources invested in those battle groups could have funded infrastructure development on 15 colonies. And for what? We gained nothing. The debate in the council chambers was broadcast across the empire, as was tradition. Vexthor watched from his quarters as the people who actually governed his civilization wrestled with the decision. In the end, the vote wasn't even close. The High Council decided unanimously to establish the Terran exclusion zone as official Zalkari policy. Any ship or citizen who violated the quarantine would face immediate prosecution. The penalty would be severe: execution for military personnel, life imprisonment for civilians. But the Council went further than that. They sent a delegation to the Galactic Council, the loose confederation of species that govern trade and diplomatic relations across known space. Vexthor was required to accompany them as a witness. The Galactic Council met on a neutral station called Haven's Gate, a massive structure that orbited a dead star halfway between several major civilizations. Representatives from 40 different species gathered in the Great Chamber, translators working overtime to convert the babble of languages into something coherent. Counselor Thera presented the Zalkari case personally. We come before this council to share information about a species that most of you likely don't know exists. Humans. Terrans. They occupy a single solar system in a remote sector that they have marked as quarantined. She activated a holographic display showing the warning beacons, the tactical footage, everything the humans had provided. The assembly watched in stunned silence. We ignored their warnings, Thera continued. Twice. At the cost of thousands of lives and hundreds of ships. We came here today to ensure no one else makes the same mistake. The debate that followed was intense. Some species representatives argued that any civilization powerful enough to pose such a threat should be destroyed preemptively. Others insisted that a species asking only to be left alone should be granted that wish. A few suggested trying to establish diplomatic relations, to bring the humans into the galactic community. Vexthor was called to testify. He stood before the assembled representatives of galactic civilization and told his story. Not the military report. Not the dry tactical analysis. He told them about Ambassador Grant's fear. About Rachel Torres humming while she flew because she'd accepted her cage. About humans who had deliberately crippled their own potential for expansion because they were terrified of what they might become. They don't want to conquer, Vexthor said, his voice carrying through the chamber. They don't want trade or alliances or diplomatic relations. They want to be forgotten. And I believe, no, I know, that we should grant them that wish. Because the alternative is facing a species that has spent 300 years preparing for a war while desperately hoping it never comes. He paused, looking around at the gathered representatives. I lost 20,000 soldiers learning this lesson. Don't make my mistake. Don't test them. Don't approach them. Don't try to make friends or enemies. Just leave them alone. The vote took 2 days of deliberation. In the end, 38 of the 40 species voted to establish the Terran exclusion zone as galactic law. The 2 species who voted against, both aggressive militaristic civilizations, were overruled by the majority. The beacon Vexthor had brought was duplicated and distributed. Soon, every major spacefaring civilization had access to the full records of what happened when someone ignored the human warnings. The footage spread through military academies, being used as a case study in the dangers of overconfidence. Young officers across the galaxy watched Vexthor's defeats and learned from them. Vexthor himself became something of a reluctant celebrity. He was invited to speak at military colleges, to share his experiences with new generations of officers. He always accepted, always told the story, always ended with the same warning: pride is not worth your life. Glory is not worth your species. Learn from my mistakes. Honor the exclusion zone. 5 years after his return, Vexthor was promoted to admiral and given command of the Boundary Fleet, a new military formation tasked with enforcing the Terran exclusion zone from the Zalkari side. His ships patrolled the beacons, turned away curious explorers, and ensured that no one else suffered what he had suffered. It was during one of these patrols that he received an unexpected transmission. The signal was faint, coming from just inside Terran space. It was Captain Jake Mitchell. Admiral Vexthor, Mitchell's voice came through, friendly and warm. It's good to hear you're still alive and kicking. I wanted to reach out and say thank you. Thank me? Vexthor was confused. For what? For doing the hard thing, Mitchell replied. For swallowing your pride and telling the truth. For making sure your people understood. We've been monitoring galactic communications. We know about the exclusion zone, about the Galactic Council vote. You saved a lot of lives, Admiral. Both yours and ours. Vexthor felt a strange warmth at those words. I only did what was necessary. That's more than most people do, Mitchell said. Listen, I know we'll probably never meet face to face again. The exclusion zone is likely to stand for generations, maybe centuries. But I wanted you to know that we see what you're doing out there. We appreciate it. And if you ever need anything, if enforcement of the zone becomes difficult, if someone tries to challenge it, you let us know. We'll back you up. I hope that never becomes necessary, Vexthor said sincerely. So do we, Admiral. So do we. Mitchell out. The transmission ended, leaving Vexthor alone with his thoughts. He looked out at the vast expanse of space, at the invisible line separating human territory from the rest of the galaxy. Somewhere beyond that line, 8 billion humans lived their lives, hoping their isolation would hold, hoping they would never have to become the monsters they were capable of being. And on this side of the line, Vexthor would make sure that hope wasn't in vain. He spent the remaining 20 years of his career commanding the Boundary Fleet. In all that time, only 3 ships tried to violate the exclusion zone. 2 were stopped by Vexthor's patrols and turned away with stern warnings. The third, a pirate vessel fleeing Zalkari authorities, made it past the boundary before Vexthor's ships could intercept. Captain Mitchell's ship disabled the pirate vessel in less than 30 seconds and returned it to Zalkari custody with a polite note thanking them for their enforcement efforts. When Vexthor finally retired, old and tired and ready to rest, he gave one final speech to his replacement. The humans are not our enemies, he said. They're not our friends either. They're simply a force of nature, like a star that burns too bright to approach. You can admire it from a distance. You can even be grateful for the light it provides. But you never, ever fly directly into it. His replacement, a young commander named Shara, nodded seriously. The exclusion zone will be maintained, sir. You have my word. Good, Vexthor said. Because some lessons shouldn't need to be relearned. The blood has already been spilled. Let it be enough. As he left military service and retired to a quiet colony world, Vexthor would sometimes look up at the stars and wonder about the humans. Were they still there in their self-imposed cage? Were they happy? Did they ever regret their isolation? He would never know. The exclusion zone held firm, generation after generation. The humans remained silent, watching their borders, maintaining their automated defenses, living their lives in a single solar system while the rest of the galaxy expanded around them. And perhaps that was the greatest victory of all. Not the battles fought but the battles avoided. Not the enemies defeated but the peace maintained. Vexthor died peacefully at the age of 84, surrounded by family who had only ever known a galaxy where the Terran exclusion zone was simply an accepted fact of life. His last words were a warning he had spent decades repeating: honor the quarantine. Some cages exist to protect those outside. In the centuries that followed, the exclusion zone became more than policy. It became legend, then myth, then simply the way things were. New species joining the galactic community learned about the humans the way children learn about dangerous things. Not through experience but through stories passed down. And in their isolated system the humans waited. Watched. Hoped. Prayed they would never have to show the galaxy what they truly were. The warning beacons still broadcast their message, centuries old now but still functional. Still clear. Still honest. Quarantine zone. Terran space. Do not enter. And for the most part the galaxy listened. Because some warnings once learned are never forgotten.